Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Ted, for inviting me to be a plenary speaker at this year's Oceans 2010 meeting. I wish to say a few words about the International Seabed Authority. I have no idea how many of you are aware of this body and of its work. And my talk this morning will be on the International Seabed Authority. In the 70s, at the United Nations, led by the United States, all the countries of the world embarked on an effort to put order and set up a legal framework for all oceans of the world. This was done under a convention referred to as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This treaty divided up ocean space, set up a framework for its use, particularly of its resources, but took care of things such as navigation, etc., etc. The division of ocean space was based on a criterion that 200 nautical miles for coastal states, all the resources to be found in this area belong to the coastal state. If the coastal state also had a continental shelf, and this continental shelf could extend, the coastal state was allowed to extend this continental shelf up to 350 nautical miles. Beyond this, beyond the 350, 200 nautical miles, it was declared an international seabed area where all the mineral resources on the seabed were to be administered by a body that was referred to as the International Seabed Authority. At the present time, we have 3 institutions to work out all problems and some of these benefits for all countries of the world. The first one is the Continental Shelf Commission, and any country interested in extending their continental shelf up to 350 nautical miles, any country is obliged to bring certain required pieces of data contained in one of the articles, Article 76, to this body. The body looks at the data, determines whether it's accurate and whether it satisfies the criteria laid in the convention. If that's the case, that country can extend its jurisdiction up to the 350 nautical miles. There's a second one. The second one is the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. This is a body that has the responsibility to adjudicate all manner of problems related to the sea, between states, between, actually much of what they've been doing involves ships that go into other people's territories without the required permissions, etc., etc. The third one is the International Seabed Authority. We have been set up to administer the mineral resources of the area. I don't know how clear this map is. The pink areas are an estimate of what we consider the international seabed area to be. There's plenty of work going on with the continental shelf. Many states have, in fact, most states have declared their exclusive economic zone. The work that's taking place that will end up with a clear definition of the area is the work on the continental shelf. We've estimated this area to be, the pink areas shown there, this is about 50% of the Earth's surface. The tasks of the authority are defined by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. In 1994, an agreement to modify it took place. Just some background on that. While the convention was going on, all kinds of expectations were raised. The mineral resources that had been found at that time, polymetallic nodules, the word around the corridors of the UN was that this was going to be a healthy business. There would be plenty of money that came out of mining these resources. During the negotiation on the part of the convention that governs the authority, Part 11, the developing states all had these incredible expectations. There'll be mining, technology will be transferred to them, there'll be all kinds of money that came out of mining, and a number of provisions were put into this part. When it came time to sign the treaty, President Reagan suggested that, in fact, not only President Reagan, there were quite a few of the industrialized states, including Germany, that all decided that some of the provisions were onerous. There was a feeling, for example, that the provisions on the transfer of technology almost made it mandatory for this technology to be transferred. These kinds of provisions were not acceptable to these states, and from 1982, a lot of time was spent negotiating these provisions, and in the final analysis, in 1994, an agreement was reached where most of these provisions were either removed or watered down. The authority and its work is governed by Part 11 of the Convention, and this agreement that modified some of the provisions of Part 11. According to the Convention, in the very first, in the preambular part of the Convention, in Article 137, it says that all rights in the resources of the area are vested in mankind as a whole, on whose behalf the authority shall act. It's also said that the authority is the organization through which states parties to the convention shall, in accordance with the regime for the area established in Part 11 and the agreement, organize and control activities in the area, particularly with a view to administering the resources of the area. During the time that the convention was being negotiated, not much was known about the resources of the area. One thing was very clear, and that was the one resource that everybody was clear about were polymetallic nodules. Every one of the big states, from the US, Japan, the United Kingdom, Italy, all the big states during this period, all sent campaigns that went in particular to the part of the international seabed area referred to as the Clarion Clipperton zone. Everybody came back, found large resources, huge resources of the particular mineral polymetallic nodules. There was clearly something there. The issue was really how you could get these resources from the bottom of the seabed, bring it back on land and make a profit. It's still the problem right now. But at that time, it seemed very, very exciting. An engineer from Berkeley at that time called John Miro, John, together with an ambassador of Malta to the United Nations, Arvid Pardo, came to the United Nations and talked a lot about these resources. The General Assembly met on the subject matter, and the polymetallic nodules, which are the only ones known at the time, plus anything that would be found in the future, were all declared the common heritage of mankind. It seemed to be so vast and the potential just incredible that this body that was to be established, the authority, they had to sit down, figure out exactly how it was going to be. When we were established in 1994, there were three principal organs that had to be put in place. The first was the Assembly of the Whole, then a council, and a Secretariat. We also had to set up two subsidiary bodies, a legal and technical commission, and a finance committee. The Assembly is the sole organ of the authority that consists of all its members. It's the supreme organ of the authority to which the other principal organs are accountable. We currently have 160 members, including the European Community. Unfortunately, the United States is not party to the treaty and therefore is not a member. The Council. The Council has 36 members who are elected by the Assembly into 5 chambers. There are 4 members from among those states parties that consume over 2% of the world production of the principal metals to be found in polymetallic nodules. The principal metals are nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. There are 4 of them, and then we also have to include within the 4 a state from Eastern Europe. During the time the convention was being negotiated, we still had the big business between Eastern Europe, the communist regime, and the capitalist lot. And in everything we did, we had to take into account the Eastern European bloc. We also have 4 members from among the 8 states parties which have made the largest investments in preparation for and in the conduct of activities in the area. Again, during the time the convention was being negotiated, a number of states went out into the international seabed area and started to undertake prospecting and what we would call exploration. The terminology used at that time were pioneer activities. They had spent a lot of money and they had to be protected. The investments had to be protected. So they were given the status of pioneer investors. And the areas that they were looking at, the areas they were working in, those areas were kept in order to be grandfathered into any regime that came up when the authority was established. There were 8 of them, and in this body, half of them were represented in the body to protect their interests. So 4 members out of the 8 were put into the council. The other group we had to take care of were the states parties that produced the same metals from land. Quite a few of the developing countries, as well as countries like Canada, were producing a lot of the same metals that would be coming from the deep seabed. For example, nickel. For example, copper. For example, cobalt. For example, manganese. So again, their interests were represented on the council by having 4 of them elected into the council. One of the things that was recognized was that, like we had small developing island states, we have landlocked states, all of whom were supposed to be able to participate in the riches that was seen to be coming from the international seabed area. Therefore, there was one of the chambers was supposed to have 6 such states. Those were landlocked states, importers of the categories of minerals to be derived from the area, states which were also potential producers of items such as the nickel, the copper, the cobalt, etc. Finally, we had a chamber which had 18 members. These were placed on the council on the basis of equitable geographical representation, etc., etc. The council is the executive organ of the authority. It has the power to establish, in conformity with the convention and the agreement, the specific policies to be pursued by the authority on any question or matter within the competence of the authority. The third principal organ is the Secretariat. I was elected in 2008, and I started to work as Secretary General in 2009. We are not a large secretariat. Actually, Part 11 in particular ensures that the size of the Secretariat is commensurate with activities in the area. Originally, the idea has been that once there's mining and there are revenues being produced, the Secretariat would be, the administrative funds required for the Secretariat would come from the proceeds of mining. There are no such proceeds, there's no deep seabed mining at the present time, so member states have to pay for the Secretariat. That being the case, we are a little bit short of 50 members in the Secretariat. We have two subsidiary bodies. As I mentioned before, these are the Legal and Technical Commission and the Finance Committee. One of the biggest tasks of the Legal and Technical Commission is to facilitate the work of the Council by drawing up rules, regulations, and procedures for exploration and for exploitation as well. It has other items to take care of, but the biggest item, in order to put everybody under some form of a contract who's interested in working in that area, is the adoption of rules, regulations, and procedures. The Finance Committee, again, this body was set up by the implementation agreement. It was clear at the time the implementation agreement was being negotiated that there wouldn't be mining at the time that the authority would be established. The Finance Committee is basically there to ensure that the funds that come from member states are correctly used. Its representatives include the 5 largest contributors to the administrative budget. We follow the same procedure as is followed in the United Nations, and we have members also from those groups that I mentioned in the chamber for the council. We have one annual session a year. At this session, the Legal and Technical Commission meets, the Finance Committee meets, the council meets, and the Assembly also meets. Our functions. We are to administer the mineral resources of the International Seabed area, called the area, and this is known as the common heritage of mankind. The authority is to adopt rules, regulations, and procedures for the conduct of activities, that is, prospecting, exploration, and exploitation of the mineral resources in the area. We are to promote and encourage marine scientific research in the area, and we are to protect and conserve the natural resources of the area and prevent damage to the flora and fauna of the marine environment. At the present time, there are 3 mineral resources that are of commercial interest, and it is for these 3 mineral resources that we are working hard at adopting rules, regulations, and procedures for the various parts of the mining activity, prospecting, exploration, and exploitation. These are polymetallic sulfides, polymetallic nodules, and cobalt-rich ferromanganese crusts. The one we've known the most about are polymetallic nodules. These were discovered in 1868 in the Kara Sea in the Arctic Ocean of Siberia. This was during the scientific expedition of the Challenger, and they were found to occur in most oceans of the world. The nodules of commercial interest have been in the Clarion Clipperton zone in the equatorial Pacific Ocean and in the central Indian Ocean. Nodules occur on the floors of the ocean in a single layer. They contain various metals, among which nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese, also molybdenum, vanadium, and titanium, are of economic interest. The grade of nodules, that is, its dry weight and the abundance of nodules, the weight of wet nodules per unit area of the ocean floor, usually expressed as kilograms per square meter, determine the amount of metals contained in situ in a given area. Grades for potential economic deposits have been given in the general range of 1.1 to 1.6% nickel, 0.9 to 1.2% copper, 0.2 to 0.3% cobalt, and 25 to 30% manganese. The range for abundance is indicated as anywhere from 5 to 15 kilograms per square meter. Okay, I've gone through paragraph 17 already. The next set of minerals, the cobalt-rich crust, these were discovered while the convention was being negotiated. This was during the era that we made major movements with the discovery of plate tectonics. This revealed that the ocean basins were dynamic features that open and close on a time scale of tens to millions of years, coupled with movements of land areas known as continental drift. We had been thinking during the negotiation on the convention, much of the thought about the oceans was that they were simply passive sinks for material eroded from land. But it was discovered during this period that there are also active sources of mineralization. Rather than being big bathtubs that hold the ocean basins are leaky containers for the seawater because the volcanic rocks that underlie the seafloor are fractured. In any event, where seawater flows near hot molten rocks, upwelling a plate boundary submerged under the oceans, it is heated, expands, becomes lighter, and rises buoyantly, dissolving and transporting metals from the surrounding rock. The metals react with sulfur in the seawater and precipitate as polymetallic sulfides deposits beneath and on the seafloor. Hot metal and sulfides-rich solutions discharge from the seafloor into the deep ocean and precipitate as clouds of metallic mineral particles called black smokers because they resemble black smoke billowing from factory smokestacks. These were discovered as recently as 1978, and sulfides contain copper, iron, zinc, silver, gold, and other metals in varying amounts. Polymetallic sulfides deposits occur at areas generally the size of a football field where hot springs discharge from the seafloor, hydrothermal venting. These areas are widely spaced along a submerged volcanic mountain range that is approximately 60,000 kilometers in length at a plate boundary that extends through all the ocean basins of the world, largely within the international area, known as the mid-ocean ridge. The same metal-rich seafloor hot springs that concentrate sulfides mineral deposits also energize heat-loving microbes. These microbes use chemicals in the hot springs dissolved from underlying rocks as an energy source to manufacture carbohydrates. The discovery of sulfides, the discovery of the microbes around the sulfides also has resulted in a lot of debate at the United Nations. The debates actually concern the microbes that are found there. Information coming out about the commercial applications of these microbes, on what these extremophiles can be used for, etc., have resulted in a lot of heated debate at the United Nations as to who owns the rights to these microbes, how they're supposed to be shared, etc. At the present, however, the authority is only responsible for mineral resources and not for microbes. There's been no decision in this regard. The crusts were also discovered during the scientific expedition of the Challenger. That's 1872 to 1876. One or several of its dredges yielded this material, which for a long while was assumed to be just regular polymetallic nodules. In the 70s, the economic potential for these mineral resources was found, and they're important potential resource for cobalt, titanium, cerium, nickel, platinum, manganese, thallium, and tellurium. The first mineral resource that we did anything about, that is by way of adopting rules, regulations, and procedures, were polymetallic nodules. As I mentioned, during the time the convention itself was being negotiated, Many countries had gone out into the international seabed area and started looking, prospecting for these resources, had identified areas of potential interest, and had come back. They informed the UN as such. They gave the geographical coordinates for these areas, and on that basis, they were given, those states were given the status of pioneer investors. Once the authority was established, we couldn't have people working under a regime outside of the authority. Therefore, our first interest was in adopting rules, regulations, and procedures for prospecting and exploration, and signing the 8 countries into signing exploration contracts with those entities. We started in 94, or in 94 we were established. We started working in earnest on these regulations in 96. And on 13 July 2000, the Assembly of the Authority, that's the Assembly of the Whole, adopted these regulations. There are 40 of them and 4 annexes, including a model contract. The adoption of these regulations enabled the authority to issue contracts for exploration for 15 years each to the 7 former registered pioneer investors. Anyway, on the right hand, the top right hand, we have the areas. I'm not sure how large it is, but we have the areas within the Clarion Clipperton zone that contains where all the contractors have their exploration licenses. 7 of them right now. The twist in the whole thing was that while we were working under the convention to negotiate the convention, it started during the time with Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger came to the UN and he proposed a system to ensure that it wouldn't just be the industrialized countries that would be able to get the richest deposits. The system he suggested has been referred to as the parallel system. Every applicant had to come forward with an area that could support 2 mining operations. The applicant had to bring certain data and information to enable the bodies concerned to be able to check to see whether they were of the same estimated commercial value. One of the areas was given to the applicant. This area started off the size of 150,000 square kilometers, and over a period of 8 years, the contractor was supposed to relinquish half of it. The 150,000 square kilometers that was set aside and referred to as a reserved area. The reserved area was supposed to be worked on by developing country states who developed the necessary financial and technical capability down the line. We refer to them as reserved areas. The reserved areas in this map are the areas in white. We have, I believe I've also noted who the contractors are there. The deal with the regulations is that any contractor or any entity, as the lawyers refer to it, any entity that comes in there and wants to either explore or mine needs to have a sponsoring state. It was felt that it was better to put the obligation to ensure that, for example, the environment is not destroyed and stuff on the sponsoring state. In the Clarion Clipperton zone at the present time, we have Ifremer, that's France as the sponsoring state, Yuzhno Geologia, that's Russia as the sponsoring state, Comra with China as the sponsoring state. We have the Inter-Ocean Metal Organization, which is a group of Eastern European states led by Poland. We have Germany with BGR as the contractor. Oh, it's better I can read it if I can. Then we have Korea with Cordy. Germany was the most recent country to obtain a license. One other contractor we have, but that contractor is not in the Clarion Clipperton zone, but in the Central Indian Ocean Basin. That's the government of India. So we have these contractors, many of whom signed the contracts about the same time, all of which have 15 years of exploration. From where I sit, it's not obvious to me that there will be a request for exploitation at the end of the 15-year period. And I also don't believe that the contracts will be relinquished. I suspect that the authority will have to give them an additional 5 years to see wherever they can get to. Anyway, by entering into these contracts and allocating areas of the seabed in the global commons for the exclusive use of contractors, the authority took the first tangible and highly significant step in the exercise of its unique responsibility under the Convention to administer the area and its resources on behalf of mankind. The contractors provide us with an annual report each year. They tell us what they're doing in relation to whatever they signed under their contracts. These annual reports are reviewed by the Legal and Technical Commission that in turn reports to the Council to say whether contractors are meeting their obligations under the contracts. We have the sulfides. We've been working on codes for exploration for the sulfides and the crusts. At this year's session, the 16th session of the authority, we adopted an exploration code for sulfides. I'm pleased to announce that following the adoption of this code, China has requested an exploration contract with us for polymetallic sulfides. I'm also informed that the Russian Federation intends to do something similar at our 17th session. I wish to talk a little bit about our work. It's amazing how little we know about the oceans. I mean, I'm talking about this from the perspective of trying to mine resources, from the perspective of trying to protect the environment, rules you want to tell people about, you want contractors to follow, guidelines for contractors, etc., etc. There's even the secondary problem. Many people who are exploring or prospecting for these resources, many of whom are current contractors with us, there was no standardization. I mean, everybody was doing their own thing. Then you create a body and you say to this body, you must administer this, you must do this, you must do that. And you begin to realize how difficult it is to compare anything. There's data from here, there's data from there, they weren't collected the same way. They're not even named the same. Anyway, based on this, a lot of the information we get, we try to do so through technical workshops. We try to invite as many of the scientists and engineers that we're aware of that have been working in this area or worked in this area to these workshops so that we can unearth whatever is available by way of knowledge, see which direction we should go, and what we should encourage scientific researching organizations to do. We've had quite a few workshops that have helped us. For example, we had to develop environmental guidelines for nodule exploration, knowing fully well that if there was going to be any major problems, it would be during exploitation. But we knew the various things had to be done during exploration. We had a workshop, we had all the contractors present, we had independent scientists present, and we came up with some guidelines. These guidelines have been incorporated into the regulations for exploration for polymetallic nodules. We looked at technologies that were supposed to be used for mining deep seabed polymetallic nodules. Again, I think it was a very worthwhile workshop. There were technologies that were being pushed by various countries that had specialized in various types of technologies. There were contractors who were just beginning to put together technologies for mining. I think it was useful. I must admit, however, that we are still awaiting the first deep seabed mine. Without that deep seabed mine, I'm hard-pressed to understand what the common heritage means. We find more and more that there's a big need for collaboration. We need to have collaboration among scientists, with institutions, to get at some of the information we need. I'll give you an example. With the sulfides, much of the work that is being done is clearly around the hydrothermal vents. The animals that you find there are just awesome. They look spectacular. I somehow doubt that the mining of sulfides will be at active vents. I suspect they'll be at inactive vents. For our purposes, therefore, what we are interested in is not so much what occurs at the active vents, but those that might be found at inactive vents. I believe it was last year, I'd gone to a meeting of scientists who were working with hydrothermal vents, and I was quite interested to hear anything about inactive vents where there might be some deposits of interest. Not a one mentioned an inactive vent. And when I did ask what's going on, I mean, do you guys look at these inactive vents as well? The answer I got was they're not sexy. They are no fabulous looking animals. There might be animals, but they don't look like they do at the active vents. Anyway, we need collaboration because we have a small budget. Much of the work has to be from things like marine scientific research, and we reach out to any of the groups that might be doing work that will be able to help us. We've done quite a few other workshops. Like I say, most of the time it's to help us know a bit more about the area so that the decision makers we have, the council members, the legal and technical commission members, all these people can be better educated. It'd be fabulous if there could be much more work done on the oceans. I mean, without that, we are a little bit hamstrung. This year in November, we are going to convene a workshop on an environmental management plan for the Clarion Clipperton zone. We're going to do this in Kingston at our headquarters. Like I point out, we have 8 contractors in the Clarion Clipperton zone. Yes, they're supposed to provide us with some data and information, but there's no clear plan. It's like we're picking little bits and pieces here and there, and we're trying to bring everybody under one umbrella. One of the biggest things for us is the protection and conservation of the natural resources of the area and prevention of damage to the flora and fauna of the marine environment. What tends to happen is because many people have absolutely no idea what's going to happen with deep seabed mining, you get a lot of this big fright, how it's going to destroy everything. I'm a little bit hard-pressed to see all of that. It's not petroleum. It's not like what we had in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, you're talking about, for example, with nodules, plumes from working these deposits. We, however, because of the fear everybody has, we make it a point to keep looking at the marine environment. We make it a point that whatever activity we're talking about, some workshop, some work is done to see what the possible impact could be. I go back to how much we know about the oceans. I'm an engineer. The first time I saw some of these images of flora you could find in the deep sea bed, for example, around nodule deposits, I amazed. You have business like this, we keep trying to know as much about them as possible, see what the impact of mining or exploration would be on them. We've had projects to assist us to learn more about the environment. We had this one, which was on the Kaplan project, where we worked with the Kaplan Foundation and a number of scientists. We did this work to see whether the animals around nodule deposits, how they'll be impacted by nodule mining. We've created a data repository where all the data we have on the various minerals and the environment, we keep all of this, is open to the general public, and we hope that people use it. Actually, we've had quite a few hits on them over time. We've had a collaboration with Sensitization, and we do what are described as sensitization seminars. We find again that in many regions of the world, nobody knows anything about deep seabed mining, or the work of the authority. We get requests and we go and make presentations to them to let them know what the work is all about. We've done 4 of those. We did one in Indonesia, another in Brazil, Nigeria, Spain, and we'll be doing another one in Jamaica. We will continue to monitor the 8 contracts we have for nodule mining. We will begin to develop this environmental management plan following our workshop next month, well, November. We are going to develop regulations for nodule exploitation. Currently, we only have regulations for nodule exploration. We hope to begin to do something about exploitation, to at least encourage people to begin to think about exploration. We developed a geologic model of the resources in the CCZ. We are working on a similar model for nodule resources in the Central Indian Ocean Basin. We're also trying to get people to standardize their geologic data, how they're described, etc. And similarly, the biodiversity areas such as the taxonomy, because again, we want to use a standardized taxonomy. Sulfides, again, it's all fairly repetitive. We need to enter into contract with China. We want to develop guidelines for the establishment of environmental baselines at sulfides deposits. Again, to introduce a standardized taxonomy for biota associated with sulfides. We need to adopt an exploration code for across. We want to continue with our central data repository, and we also want to establish an internship and an outreach program. Distinguished guests, participants, thank you very much. I'm sorry I run on a little bit, but thanks very much.